Good evening, everyone. Welcome to an Absolver stream with the 2MK team. I'm your host for today, Rillian, and our first battle for the day has been with the matchmaking system to bring us into the same instance in the first place. According to the last data point we have lost, and therefore you only have just Vine and myself at the moment. The Rabbit and Sun will be working on joining us soon enough to give us at least some other styles of practice. This is our EU stream, but basically this Absolver servers are more or less all one thing unless you are in a co-op instance, and that means that nothing in particular is going to be useful here. This is probably not the sort of game people are familiar with from our content. Fighting game, players may have heard of it, but probably wouldn't have played it so much given what exactly it is. I won't necessarily be explaining too much Absolver in this stream. We're probably going to be taking that as we go and fighting more so than anything else. So, the two things you do need to understand are that the frame data for the game mostly is the same as you might expect from a game like Dead or Alive or Tekken, and mostly, and there's basically other specials to contend with once that starts. So, we begin. We are, as always, quite rusty. And many of us don't have our decks, our move lists, optimized enough to be certain about any given thing. Similarly, while this game does have a standard match mode in which you fight people under completely normal circumstances, as you might consider it, this one doesn't work like that. It's closer to King of Fighters and similar, where your health stays somewhat in between. So the winner is usually at some disadvantage, at least in the case of how much health they have, but they do recover some, so it's not as if nothing will be useful. Reviving your opponent is not necessary in the standard mode that leads to this, but it is necessary in this one. The thing that makes this work as a fighting game is a little bit complicated to explain to those who haven't played 3D fighting games at relatively higher levels. But overall, there are multiple things happening. There's a lock-on button to make it play closer to what you expect. There's a block button, more so because holding back to block really would not work in this game. And, most importantly, you can use the block button as a feint button to prevent certain styles of attack from finishing and therefore allow you to do more trickery. But because each move you do is in some way limited by its frame data, you cannot simply feint out of everything and expect it to work. It is still a fighting game in that regard. There is frame data happening. And it is because of this frame data happening that you have to be very careful about which moves you start under what situations. At the moment I'm somewhat leaving it to the rest of the team to try to fix whatever it is. But at some point, we may take a minor break to see if non-streamer here, Just Fine, Handrefist, can fix the problem that they were having. Or they'll most likely just fight off with each other for a bit. But for now, we're going to continue. I think I won that bout, relatively speaking. And at the moment, we're still mostly shaking the rust off, getting used to movement, getting used to deck things. Like most games, this is actually very pressure-y if you try to play it yourself. Most people you face online will just pressure you, or run away and then do long-range moves. And as usual, we aren't that, so you'll get to see more of it, I guess. On top of being able to make your own fighting style, at least out of the 160 moves they have available to you, it's a little more complicated than that, and we'll probably show that off at some point. But you do have some options on that regard, regardless of anything else going on, and you have an underlying style that helps out there as well. I'm using the one you'll find most often on videos of this game because it's the quote-unquote coolest by most people's standards, as it dodges attacks entirely. Now, you not only have to be good enough to dodge all of these attacks by knowing exactly what type of attack they are, generally countering styles, you also need to be able to tell whether or not your opponent is even going to continue their attack. They must be both timed and the dodge type has to be correct. Unfortunately, you can't necessarily say this is better. It has a lot more mobility options and will keep you out of trouble in a lot of situations, but there are certain styles, certain ways of attacking in general that don't lead to that being good. It is, however, definitely flashy, so expect to see a lot of it all over the internet if you go looking for any other indicators of this game. It is also, even though it's this type of game, heavy on the accuracy. One of the main requirements for playing Absolver is understanding which moves will go through other attacks, and therefore, if you expect your opponent to quote-unquote go low, go high, or anything like that, you have to be able to choose the correct attack, and more importantly, to have the correct attack in your deck and have it in the right place in the sequence to do whatever you wish. Otherwise, you're forced to just block. Similarly, people have moves whose entire purpose is to catch people moving one way or another. Lunging attacks to catch backdashes. String chains to stop other situations. Well, someone's around. Is this the someone we're looking for? It appears to be a someone. So, now I believe we'll move to this side, and I will just watch. And try to keep a good camera angle on the action for you. The game does not really require you to have quick attacks. It does not require you to have lows. It does not require you to do basically anything. It has some limitations in which moves can be used to cross into others, and that's about it. The gem shards, which you can see on me, but can't easily see on the others at the moment, are used for what we will call specials. They're more so like metered magic for the purposes of making sure you have some way of expanding your style. Usually, you will find the basics such as healing and a shockwave style attack to push your opponent away from you, but they can block the shockwave and they can interrupt the healing, so it's still not true magic in that sense. You will always get some option, but you do have to worry about when you're going to use it. But as I said, I'm not really explaining Absolver beyond that because I'm trying to have this content be just both a stopgap until DNF Duel is available and to view this as much like a fighting game as possible, because the purpose of us playing this isn't necessarily to be good at Absolver. Being good at fighting games can definitely help you be good at Absolver, but as you know from playing any set of games, balance matters a lot, and first order strategies in certain games can be really messed up. I don't actually find that I personally encountered too many first order strategies in Absolver that I would consider to be problems, but they're definitely notable enough that you have to care. Left our war gloves on the ground. So back to the action, and again, aiming to view this as fighting game style. One of the things that would make this hard for me to commentate or give too much information on is because since everyone's deck can be basically completely different, even if there are a lot of things where people will say this is the best or specific combinations tend to work better than others, you can never be absolutely sure what an opponent is going to do. It's not you have a character and the character does this. The character does whatever you want them to do. And therefore you must learn your opponent's skill set and flows really quickly. But you will also notice that if you're familiar with the character played by these players in other games, you'll probably notice that a lot of their attacks are relatively familiar. If you're not someone who watches a lot of our streams, then obviously this means nothing to you, but you could take it the other way as well. You see the same Matt's range style sweep flow coming from Omni Rabbit's side. And just fine, sort of pressuring with punches that are just about strong enough to deal with the problem. Just advantageous enough that the opponent does not necessarily want to do anything, not because they can't hit any counterattack, but because they might be tricked or blocked or armored through in certain cases, leaving things kind of stressful. So I think that was their match ending, which means it is now me again. So you'll go back to having this from the first person view. How you decide which move exactly is going to happen is related to what of the four stances the character is in. And these stances change between each movement. You can also do various things to, let's call it, fake out so that the stance changes, and that part is, again, super complicated. Just think of it as combos for now and watch it in that way. So now we've moved into actually using the meter, more or less. Mine being applied for knockback, and the other effect that mine does I'll explain later, and hers being used for gravity, keeping me from doing certain things, moving as quickly, etc. Hey, our rabbit disappeared. But as I said, they're working hard at resolving whatever that is. That was almost a whiff punish. And that was what you'd expect. Simply put, a slightly faster move. Both of them went into the air, a frame clash happened. Just Vine's build being one that tends to win out in that sort of situation. We're still doing all of the same things we do in every other game, reading when the opponent will attempt an attack, reading when they will shift around, and whether or not it's a good idea to even counterattack at all rather than blocking. In that situation, for example, I was in the early stance because I have relatively quick attacks out of those stances that, unless my opponent is armored, their longer strikes will still have issues. Similarly, Just Vine's style here allows for a lot of quick attacks out of bad situations. And feints that don't necessarily telegraph too much what is supposed to be happening. We're not seeing a lot of feinting right now, probably because we're the style of players who already understand our movements quite a lot, and the other players' movement as well. But you also use this for combos. Specifically to change combo routes altogether. So no matter how explosive and confusing this looks, to a point, especially once practiced, we know what we're doing here. And now I guess it's time to explain that one. That ability prevents the opponent from recovering stamina, which is used to block and attack, and basically everything really. Wrong stance, too slow, and I had to feint out of that for that reason. People are running through, but I have no idea whether or not they have anything to do with us. Doesn't look it. One of the good things about her style, as you can see, is being able to decide to just not continue attacking just yet. Waiting until the opponent has decided, I'm moving out of the way of your attack, and then striking. So, it can come down to the same standard rock, paper, scissors style guessing game of, I have started to strike you, I can either strike you immediately again because you're going to try something slow, I can assume that you're going to try something fast, armor through it, and hit you. Or I'm just going to wait a moment for you to try to get out of the situation some other way, and then continue my attack. Some of these attacks are technically too fast to even sidestep dodge, but not in the way you're expecting it. And of course, lots of max range taps and combos are happening here. It appears that whatever attempt was made to resolve the situation has made it worse somehow, so it looks like we're without Omni Rabbit for at least the time being. We're watching ranges here really specifically. In fact, I'd say understanding the ranges of your moves is a little bit more important than understanding the properties of them, at least at first. You are going to spend a lot of time working out whether or not you can hit at the range you're at, and the footwork is complex enough that you have to watch really carefully. Other important things are learning how to assume the correct defensive stance. I wouldn't explain that, but our control scheme is as usual fairly custom, so saying how exactly that will work can't always be sure. I think we got dumped into a regular instance now, so technically we are joinable by some standard, but don't count on it. Emotes. Have fun with your emotes. I'll describe them another time. I don't really have deck building advice. The game is full of both basic and detailed guides about how to build decks from the perspective of how to be good at Absolver. And I don't think I necessarily have that style or type of deck building advice available in the first place. Alright, so we're going to let our sparring partner here attempt to resolve the issue with invites, maybe to see if we can pull our other two team members into this instance so that they can get more practice against us and not just each other. And I'll get a report on that relatively soon, and if it's completely broken, then so it is. Next time, we'll probably choose a different arena for the combat, but this is the easiest one to move around in, the largest one with clear expectations, no ring outs, no I'm going to fall in a hole now. And most people who drift to this area within the game's quasi-open world are doing so to deal with a boss that's up the hill. But rather than going to that boss myself, I wonder if I can send these invites. Because it does use the in-game system, sort of, but you may see a blue screen for a moment or two while I'm dealing with it. Oh no, apparently I am not able to send invites at all at the moment, presumably because I set something different in the very beginning. Oh no, I'm just not at a save point, am I? Right, that's why. So I'm going to dash past this boss because reasons. Has a sword out and everything. Must have chopped out some poor person moving through here before. And technically, for a moment there, I am in combat as I'm being pursued by said boss. But okay, let's see what happens if I throw out some invites. And hopefully this will not completely destroy everything, because last time it did. Oh, no. No huge loss at the moment. Good. Those were going a little faster than I expected, but sure. And I'll wait a little bit to hear from them whether or not I need to do anything in particular, if their systems aren't working, etc. But I will use this moment to show off how this is actually done. Entered area, presumably we'll see one more in a moment. Looks like I'll be able to skip that. And as I said, mainly because the intention is absolutely not to actually have any specific Absolver knowledge being imparted through these streams at this time. Oh, one more re-invite had to be sent. Stamina bar basically determines how many times you can hit, and you can level this up. So in addition to being able to make your character in terms of their style how you want, you can also slightly tweak their skills and abilities. This is going to be far, far more familiar to fighting game players than it is to players of RPGs, even though this sort of... the marketing for this game is very weird, because they don't exactly know what to call it. That said, you shouldn't ever expect it to change far beyond what you'd expect from, say, Street Fighter. Any game where like the base health is 1000 and the damage of moves and similar are based on things like that, that's what you should be expecting in terms of what it can or cannot do. Oh, I see what's happening here. There's some sort of network mismatch going on. And that's what's ruining everything. Well, we've already seen her fight, so I'm probably going to resolve this by, in fact, resetting the whole thing once again. And since the stream did start a little late, it's probably also going to continue a little late. But this is the main battle of this game at the moment. It's not under heavy enough development that I expect it to be fixed anytime soon, if at all. But at least me sending out invites doesn't break the stream using their system. So there's that. This could also have things to do with some other limit or shift. It is unfortunately not one of the best detailed things in their system, but I could probably check around and see what it is we're doing wrong here, if anything. Yeah, definitely a limit of 3, which made sense, as this is technically more so party formation for cooperative play than much else. The reason we have to use this, however, is because getting any relatively assured movement into a single instance is tricky. So I'll remember that for future. Probably have not looked into it enough before. But as it's literally no different than a regular lounge invite rotation, aside from the fact that the game considers us to be in co-op mode while I'm doing it, we can relatively easily do this as well, except for the whole having to run back and forth bit. But we are going to continue to use the courtyard for a little bit. And as far as I remember, even if you do break up the group, it still results in you being able to do whatever else you wanted to do. And so we are upward past Jinmeska to continue our stream in terms of fighting, and not just with the invite and grouping system. I need to slow down my camera sensitivity there a little bit, it looks like. This is more of our introductory stream for this content, and honestly we're not likely to cover a lot more of it, except over the next few months there'll be some, and then that will probably end when DNF comes out, because there's not that much to understand about Absolver in that way. You spend more time thinking about the precise ways you want to fight, and not how is this character supposed to work, because you have complete control of that. Now, what happens when you two start hitting each other in this co-op mode? Who cares? Let's go. I think you get an acting hostile marker, and it probably breaks the co-op. If it causes no damage, it would be more so a other setup, but for now, that's not what's going to happen. These two are very movement oriented, and you know this about them from their other characters as well if you've watched them. The heavy kick to the head, etc. None of these things should be surprising to any relatively long-term fan of streams that we have. Just by characters, you may even be able to just tell without being able to stand close enough to see who is who. Who is who. Their matches also are lasting about as long as they normally do, simply because of the interactions they like to have. Not to mention the healing. Once they're close, they tend to stay close. Since there are no throws in this game to break defense, one is relying on using enough strikes to do this correctly. Once you've broken through your opponent's stamina guard, they stagger, they regain stamina while staggering. And of course, if you're fighting online, you'll find that a lot of people will run back to try to get away from you in order to regain stamina, which is a little counterproductive depending on their build, because sometimes their stamina won't recharge because they're backdashing, because they're trying to back off quickly enough. If you do happen to play this game, or to test it out, remember that when someone is doing that, it's more so because they want you to use yours, whereas you might not have had to before. The main limitation here is, again, similar to DOA and Tekken, where if you press the button a lot, you will get a string. It's not just, well, this is the way things go now. Armor is up. Armor is more so a way to get through attacks than anything else, though. And that one came down quite close, as they often do. Even in the standard first to 3 round matches you will find in the game's more specific mode, you do still, in fact, as mentioned, have the health not recovering entirely, as I mentioned before. So, while this is not exactly correct, you shouldn't necessarily be concerned that this is too far outside the standard style of fighting for this game. The only difference is that instead of having to wait for your opponent to lift you back up, you basically respawn immediately at a different location, whichever of the respawn locations in the arena your opponent is furthest from, I think, and continue from there. Gives everyone a reprieve of some kind. The strength of strikes can be changed by the character's style, you could say. Just as in such games there are faster characters who explicitly get more damage by using fast moves, or get more damage by using multiple moves. Since everyone in this game can in fact use the exact same moves, I think I'll pull this one up. Whoop. The system is built out a little differently. There are moves that do more damage when used by fast characters. This is partially why you will see some more specific guides on how to build your character as a whole. But this is mostly just archetypes playing themselves out again. If you tend to play quick characters in games, it's likely that you want the move types that are quicker. Alright then, let's see. I'll probably face off with Omni Rabbit now, and we will go into first person mode once again. This requires a little bit of effort because, there we go. What I have to watch out for here is my opponent's ability to block through things and having a relatively clear game plan once blocking has happened. Also, outranging very slightly in certain positions is likely to lead to me having a bad time. So I need to change my style more so to focus on my lunging attacks, not my spinning ones, and not to spend too much time blocking myself. But because I can be parried, as that's my opponent's style, I can't simply rely on these basics over and over. It will not only become predictable, but unlike other games, my lunging attacks, well, I'm not really sure it's unlike other games actually, my lunging attacks will not lead to variations. If I'm lunging, it's obvious what's happening. I can work for feinting to get out of this, but chances are my opponent's strength will just overcome my feint, so no point in that. My best bet is to mix it up with the shockwave. But there's that sweep. But I am able to make the same sorts of decisions that I make in other games. If I realize, oh, I keep losing to that sweep because I stop in the middle of that sequence, what I should do is change to using that move, which will go over the sweep. But I can't do that on defense because my aerial kick takes too long. So I've worked it up to the point of mid-range footsies involving my lunges again. But when my opponent is not so much thinking about the fact that I'm going to lunge. The same flow as always is being built up over time. While Ami's attacks can be short range, they also tend to extend themselves after a while, and make good whiff punishes, so that I can't necessarily just do as I like in neutral. Generally, being good at interrupting things I want to do means that he doesn't have to worry as much about all my little trickery and other strangeness. But does have to put up with pressure. I think this is... whoever wins this is probably the winner. The useful thing of the other part is, the other mode is that it will in fact keep track for you. That adaptation was probably the one that took the most out of me in that moment. And I overcommitted, not in a way that is easy to see if you haven't played this game before, but definitely still overcommitted. So back to third-person monitoring. And we're probably keeping this stream going for another 15 minutes since we started it 15 minutes late. You will notice though, if you think about it, that Ami Rabbit changed style somewhat through this because the sweep works on me very differently. It's not a weak point to target anymore, it's a specific thing that is used to counter when I'm starting a particular string, rather than just, oh, I'm going to use this in neutral to maintain space and maintain control. My character is longer range in general and tends to attack high. Facing another character with the same style as I'd have, I'd expect them to dodge under the kicks more altogether. But just parrying them isn't always sufficient. good option is to attempt to make Omni's sweep miss, but this is actually kind of hard. Low attacks, it is definitely not that they don't miss in this game, and if you're expecting them with certain styles, with basically any style, they become relatively easy to punish. But outranging them is better, since using special defense systems, either blocking, parrying, armoring through it, or just straight dodging, all these things take up more time than just being slightly outside of the range of the hit, obviously. You are less able to whiff punish, you're more so making sure you're in the right position beforehand, even telegraphing yourself very slightly. And then, once you have done the correct defensive thing, hoping for a relatively quick hit and a good start to a combo. If your opponent feints you though, the situation doesn't usually work out because you've committed to this defensive thing instead of just, okay, that move you didn't finish, so I don't have anything to whiff punish. It's, yet again, a fighting principle. More mashy, you'll end up in situations that are not quite as good as if you could learn the spacings. And even though damage is not heavily reduced in the game, once people start using their own special abilities, i.e. the meter, to do different things, you can actually end up in really bad situations this way. Particularly because, for example, mine will stop you from regaining all the stamina you used while moving around. Or, if your opponent overcommits and misses, they'll just give chance to heal one way or another. I think I can see what level I need to set this camera to for this to work now. Did I lose count? If I did, then presumably it's time to change opponent again. So I'll stand over here and they'll probably figure that out and move to whoever is supposed to be fighting me again now. Alright then, let's go. Sun can dodge through my moves. And also has specific parrying style advances that make just standard lunging kind of difficult. The ability to outright armor through things also helps, so I have to move a little further away and use max range attacks. But you'll notice that I'm running out of stamina as this happens. Your opponent can see your stamina meter. It's not very easy, but they can see it, and they understand, once it's low, that you are not going to be launching any more attacks. They can chase you if they need to, and other setups can work better. Obviously, just running you down is likely to lead to being easily read and defeated that way. Sun style is, as you'd expect, good at reaching from far away, but not consistently and repeatedly doing that. Leading to some minor weaknesses in mine if I decide to start backdashing a lot, relative, but not necessarily a big problem. As if I'm backdashing, I'm really not gaining anything. The stamina thing is not terribly overpowered because, as noted before, the stagger matters a lot more here. The stagger is usually what I will get out of it if it works correctly. Because as soon as I have hit my opponent at low stamina, the situation will shift again. They'll be back to full, and I'll have to deal with whatever that comes out of that. So you can use it either to stop someone from attacking you, which is basically what I just did, or use it in a different way to get one hit or so. But Sun's character is also one who generally doesn't get tired. I think I almost won that one. Oh, opponent's disappeared somewhat. Maybe it glitched. Hopefully not, but I don't see any other explanations here. It's still again the instances behaving strangely. So back to trying to get the mid-range done. I missed the feint on that jab. Playing too many other games with too many other buttons. The control scheme we use for this, as noted, is very complex. But I do have a little time to go into some of it now. You can spend a little time watching whether or not my character is facing forward or facing backward while looking at the opponent over her shoulder. And that will tell you what moves I have available to me. So in this stance, I can jab quickly, and then move into lunging attacks. From this one, however, I get this lunge instead. I have control of this in some complex ways. But if my opponent can see what stance I'm standing in for the moment, they can tell what is possibly going to happen, and I in turn can fake them out, use the feint to shift out instead of doing that, for example. Go into pressure string. And apparently learn to move. This is still a role-playing game in that regard. You learn your moves by fighting other players or other situations, and doing so in small groups will normally cause you to gain things relatively quickly without much effort. But if you're playing solo, you have to learn these things from random characters out in the field, and this is mostly by defending them. If you simply beat up everyone at maximum speed and never let them do anything, you will not actually learn moves. But if you were doing that effectively and enjoying the game, you probably didn't need any extra moves. That was probably the latest I could have possibly cancelled that. Out of range and still got whiff punish in the end. But we are probably just going to continue until stream end time, since I'm definitely back into the groove of it now. The execution for this game is complex, definitely difficult in multiple ways, but somehow, at least for me, not unintuitive once you've gotten your controls right. Maybe at some point I'll give a suggestion for people who are explicitly fighting game players of any specific game to be able to say, this is the way you should probably do this. But I'll give you a little bit of what I've got now, just in case you care. After all, this is more or less an intro stream, so I might as well put in the sort of thing you need to know if you want to try playing the game. Not much else. I had to go through a bit of trouble literally asking them to change it, but the creators of this game are quite focused on, at least at the time they were still developing it, on making it as fun as possible. Normally your stance is changed by holding a button while pressing a direction, or related to moving the left or right stick. By default, you move the right stick in order to change your stance. But as a fighting game player, I found this difficult, tedious, confusing. I don't know, maybe it's just me that's weird. But I changed my stance with left stick as well as moving with left stick. And this was a setup that had to be put in especially. I don't know, once that's happened, once that change was made, everything became command normals. And it's just a question of whether or not I'm holding R1 to do this command normal or not, which is the button I use to change stances. You could use any button you like, but because you will be holding it during the process, and just to change stances as a generality you must hold it, similar to this, notice that my character moves very slightly every time she actually changes stance because you can't separate the two in that way. Still, if you're finding the setup cumbersome and you're a DOA or Tekken player or any of those types of games, maybe try it out. It can be a little hard to set up to make it do that, but it's not a waste of time to attempt it, simply because it's not actually so hard to fight like this that you need to care. Knew that sweep was coming. I have done it enough times. Once you've got that set up, all you really care about is making sure your moves are where they need to be. And again, not really something I intend to cover on this stream or Absolver streams in general. If you think the game looks interesting enough to play it, it's relatively intuitive, and I can't even begin to tell people what moves to use. At least not without watching them play a different fighting game for a long time. I did the sweep again. I should have feinted it. If I last frame feint that, will I get anything out of it? I was not expecting him to be expecting the jab. And the reason I know he was expecting the jab is because the parry timing for the other option is so much slower that he had to be expecting the jab. You'll notice that in general, Omni will block slower moves from me rather than parrying them. There's multiple reasons for this, but they'll probably get covered on a different stream, maybe tonight. We are planning to have the NA stream, and I believe it's going to be available for at least the latter half of it. But you may also get to see more players that have not joined in this time. Now that we've worked out the limitations, it probably shouldn't be so bad. But this is it, final round, before we end for this evening if you're in the EU, and afternoon I guess now for us East Coasters. If you're playing against the right people, this game is a lot of fun. If you're playing against the wrong people, this game is standard fighting game fare. It's fun if you're winning. Sort of. It's a weird sort of fun if you're winning. Not like other fighting games where you're feeling the benefits of, have I done this correctly? Or getting your combos off, or even reading and with punishing your opponent. It's just visceral in some specific way that I can't really explain. But with that, fall to darkness. That brings us to the end of our stream for tonight. This has been Brilliant 142MK. Join us again in somewhat less than 6 hours, probably, for the NA stream of similar duration, which will mostly be me repeating things that I've repeated on this stream. So if you only caught the end of this one, expect that you're not going to need to hear me talk very much to understand what's going on. Though this game is not one I expect that most viewers will have seen before, and therefore wishing you good luck with your training is probably not very helpful, I do so anyway. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.